Becky versus Maurice's high-paying job. Meet Becky. It is her first day at the firm. She barely put her box on the desk when her boss whisked her away to morning coffee. He asked her if she wanted to pick his brain for anything in the firm. When she said she couldn't think of anything, as she had just arrived, not 10 minutes ago, he went into his prepared, it seemed, speech about how great the firm was. She made it back to her office just in time for Stu, her new colleague, to come by and offer her a tour of the office. He said if she needed anything, he's in the diagonal office down from her. Made it back, unpacked her box, and was adjusting her daughter's pictures when the big boss stopped by to take her to lunch. So early? 11 a.m. on the dot, he said. He was joined by 4 other bigwigs in the firm. Stu was asked to join, but he had some work to do, he said. The lunch was your average meeting lunch. Occasionally, they would turn to her for her input, and she hesitantly simply agreed with her boss. Truth be told, she was a bit intimidated to be at lunch with such bigwigs, but she put on her professional face and tried to follow the conversation best she could. After lunch, she made a beeline at Stu's office. Amazingly, she recounted everything at lunch and asked if she was going to be trained in any of it. Stu smiled and assured her if she ever had a question to come see him and not her boss, as he was very busy. So he sat with her for 3 hours and went over everything at lunch. She made it back to her desk just in time to see her boss stop at Stu's office. He then came by and asked how she was settling in. She said Stu had been invaluable in helping her get settled. He said. He waved and went back to Stu's office, and as he was leaving, he spoke up to Stu. Keep up the good work. He waved at her and as he walked past her office. So she was alone, finally, and no one was asking her to go anywhere. She had no idea what to do. There was no training, no inbox, outbox section, and after arranging her desk again, she looked up and saw it was 5 already. She got her purse and thought to check in on Stu. She asked why he was still working. He said he was swamped and must get this out today. She waved him goodbye. She passed her boss's office, and he was also busy at work. He stopped, got up, and asked her how her first day was. She said it had been pretty breezy. Good, he said. So you're going home? He asked. She showed him her purse and nodded. You have a good night then, he said. She waved and went back to sit down. As she walked past the glass walls of his office, she hesitated for a brief second. She thought to ask was there anything he wanted her to do, well, she had to go pick up her daughter, as her own husband would also be hard at work himself, too swamped to pick up Katie. Not that she needed picking up, but it was nice to be with her mom or dad after school. The next day, it all repeated itself over again. She barely put her purse down when her boss whisked her away to breakfast. Stu came in after breakfast and introduced her to the secretaries and technical staff. The big boss came in after Stu. He asked him to join them, and Stu refused again. And there she sat at lunch, shy but putting on a professional front, agreeing with her boss. Again, she made a beeline for Stu after lunch. Again, he smiled and explained everything. 4 hours flew by, and she made it to her desk in time to see her boss appear at Stu's door, and then stopping by her door to make sure he explained everything. She barely put on lipstick in time to see it was 5 p.m. She said goodbye to Stu and her boss and hurried to pick up Katie. This went on for the rest of the week. She recounted everything to her husband Saturday morning at brunch while he pored over the week's numbers. He nodded occasionally and said, Finally, he got up and asked, Is Stu cute? She was a little annoyed at his joke. He leaned over and kissed her and went into his own home office. Bright and early morning, she put her purse down and walked past her door was her boss with a new black man. She went and asked Stu who it was, and he said, That's Maurice. He's a new hire. Comes highly recommended. He has the office right next to you in front of mine. She went to one of the secretaries to see if there was something she could work on. The secretary looked at her funnily, swiveled around, and handed her a huge stack of papers. Knock yourself out, kiddo, she said, with a look of tiredness. You look tired, Becky said to her. We need about 50 of you, and maybe another 50 of us to keep up. Yes, I'm tired. At 8 a.m. Thank you for asking, Mrs. Brown. She carried the stack to her desk and quickly realized this was everything that had been discussed at lunch. 2 hours later, Maurice and her boss returned. They walked past her office and continued talking for another 20 minutes. She couldn't hear what. At 11 a.m., the big boss walked past her office and offered Maurice to come to lunch. I couldn't possibly, but thank you, sir, he said. The big boss turned to Stu, who was also refused, and waved at him and left. Curiosity getting the best of her, she got up and peeked into Maurice's office. He was surrounded by stacks that the secretary had given her. Where she had one she thought she'd never get through, he had at least 20 stacks. She went back to her office, stunned. When 5 p.m. hit, she reached for her purse. For a second, she hesitated because she had barely a tenth of the way through the stack. Again, curiosity getting the best of her, she peeked into Maurice's office. 3 stacks were already gone. He said, "You're Mrs. Brown next door, right?" She nodded. "Pleased to meet you," he said, and buried his head in his work. As she passed her boss's office, she asked, "Is it okay if I pick up my daughter?" He came out from behind his desk. "Of course, you're on salary, not hourly." He smiled and went back to work. The next morning, the boss went to Maurice's office, not hers. But Maurice apparently didn't want to go to breakfast again. "Okay, if you need anything, Stu or I will help," her boss told him as he left. At lunch, the big boss didn't come by at all, nor for the rest of the week. Again, she left everyone working as she went home. She was still on the stack the secretary had given her. The next morning, Maurice was in the conference room talking to some people. She asked Stu about it. "Those are his clients. Well, now ours," he answered. As she went to her office, she saw the big boss and the other bigwigs go into the conference room. Again, she got up and asked Stu why the big boss was in there with Maurice. "Is he monitoring him?" Stu laughed a little. "We forget. You're really new around here. Mr. Rossi is not our boss. He's one of our clients, just like the rest of them." She looked. "You mean the other men are our clients too?" Stu nodded. "I'm your boss, and the two of you are my new team." She was confused for a second. "Then who's the other guy down the hall?" Stu smiled. "He's my secretary. He helps me with anything I need." She shook her head. "Then why do people call him the boss?" Stu nodded. "He's a boss over all the secretaries, and that's a name we give people we like our clients in there." As she was going back to her office, she happened to look into Maurice's office. It was spotless. No stacks of paper, and 2 new filing cabinets sat at the back. "Did Maurice get new filing cabinets?" she asked Stu, her boss. "No. He finished all the work last night. Went home at 9, he said. He smiled at her look of bewilderment. No one told her to get to work, to stay and work. She was simply surrounded by people that worked long hours. When she asked her husband about it, he shrugged. He said, "If you want us to hire someone to keep Katie company, you can. Not that Katie needs a sitter, but someone around the house to keep her company would be great. Unless you want to have another baby." She hired a sitter that evening. With a sitter at home, waiting for Katie to come home, she felt at ease, staying a little later. It still took her the second week to get through the first stack. Maurice seemed to have his own secretary at this point. Stu assured her that any of the secretaries were there for her to use. She tried to get 2 stacks this time. "Thank you," the secretary from before said. Now that she thought about it, almost nothing she went through her first week did Maurice go through his first week. As if reading her mind, he stopped by with one of the secretaries to ask her to join them for lunch. At lunch, he explained that by 30, he had already worked for 6 different firms. They had recruited him from the last firm he was at. She asked him how did he get through all of the work so fast. The secretary and he looked at each other puzzled. "Fast? The whole team put 150 man hours to get through that work," they both said. Becky's last day was 3 months later. Maurice shook her hand and said, "You would stay for at least 6 months. You get recruited much better like that." She said, "I'm going to have my second child. This isn't for me. It's for my husband for sure. He works this hard, but I worry about my kid." "So does he," Maurice said. "I have 3 myself." Stu said, "We'll hold the spot open for you if you want." Becky shook her head. "I'll be busy with the baby, and I don't know when I'd even want to come back." "Come back and visit when you can." 6 months later, a very pregnant Becky stopped by the office. All the secretaries were gushing over her. She asked where Stu was and Maurice. Maurice had Stu's real position, and Stu was president of the firm. He always was, really. He just liked working in operations and working with the new hires under the officers of the company. His secretary was also missing. He was back at school to take her old position since he basically did the same work. He was in school because he was needed to take over Maurice's position when he leaves. Where's Maurice going? She asked. Maurice was being heavily recruited for a professional CEO position since he had brought in over $1 billion for this firm. Wherever Maurice became CEO, Stu would also get a seat on the board. They were heavily recommending him to companies. They even came to his office here. Big Boss, Stu and Maurice ate lunch regularly with about 6 other clients every day. 4 years later, she visited and everything they had said happened. The secretary who she thought was her boss was in her office, surrounded by work. He weakly smiled at her when she popped her head in. She showed everyone her little boy. Stu gave her a box of cigars to give to her husband. Big Boss popped in and swooped her, little boy, and Stu off to lunch, where they were joined by Maurice and others. She and her little boy just ate a piece of cake and left. She never visited again. She saw Maurice on the cover of some business magazine in her husband's home office. That's him. That's the guy that started after me, she said. Yep, that guy is pretty brilliant. It's no surprise, her husband said. Do you miss it? Never. I think they wanted me to work till 9 p.m. daily, she shook her head. I bet Mr. Maurice works that much, even now, her husband said, while still working himself. Can we take a vacation? She asked him, as little Timmy jumped on her knee. He looked up from paperwork. School's out in 2 weeks? She nodded. Okay, wherever you all want to go. I'll bring all of this to a close. Works out perfectly, actually, he said. Do you need more time? She asked. He shook his head and gave her the thumbs up. Katie, where do you want to go? She said in the kitchen. Am I too old for Disney World? Katie asked. Becky looked at her. You're saying that for Timmy. Katie shrugged. Kiddo, you're the best. And no, you're not too old for Disney World.